morning.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this session. Welcome to the session, to this e-talk on climate adaptation finance. My name is Anja König. I lead EVPA's Investing for Impact, Transformative Finance, and our activities in the DACH region. EVPA is a community of leading impact finance practitioners across the spectrum of capital in more than 30 countries in Europe and internationally. Our mission is really to support the work of our community and help shape and advance the European impact ecosystem. Maybe a few words about investing for development. We set it up as a platform for people to engage, since 50% or almost 50% of EVPA members engage outside of Europe. We wanted to provide a space for conversation on topics specific to investors for development. And we also felt that there was sometimes a gap between the development finance and the impact investing community. So our hope is to bring together these different communities. We also found that a lot of interesting, innovative approaches to development are available in emerging countries, and it would be good to foster the exchange of good ideas and practices between emerging markets and Europe. So in the past, we hosted a number of e-talks, deep dive, fail labs on topics such as innovative finance, outcome-based finance, entrepreneurship development and finance. And really our intention was for allowing people to dive into the specific aspects and allow for deep sharing, but also honestly share what doesn't work, and in that way also foster the development in this space. We are very grateful for the support by the European Commission for making investing for development possible. I think some of the colleagues from the European Commission are also attending this call. At the same time, also a warm welcome to all the community out there who's not in this room. We had quite a high interest in this session, and so this session will be live streamed. Today's topic has been a key priority for many EVPA members in the international development finance and impact investing community alike. So in the high interest in this session really confirms this trend. But on the other hand, we see that the financing and investment flows are insufficient, and there is a lack of awareness about impactful and profitable business opportunities in climate adaptation in particular. So this is actually the objective of this session. We'd like to raise awareness about opportunities for both impact and returns in climate adaptation finance. And at the same time, we are really curious to get your feedback on your needs and where you see the biggest barriers, and also give us some indication about how we can best support the investing community in engaging in climate adaptation. So in today's session, we are really joined by a number of wonderful partners. So we have the German Government Agency for International Development Corporation, represented by Denise Engels, who is the lead of the private adaptation finance project at GIZ. It's wonderful also to have our African sister network, EVPA, here with us, represented by its CEO, Frank Aswani, joining us from South Africa. Our speakers, Urs Dieterich, who is the Managing Director of the Landscape Resilience Fund based in Switzerland, and Peter Onwuka, Head of Lending Africa at Root Capital, joining us from Nairobi. Laura Württemberger, the GIZ consultant on climate adaptation finance, unfortunately fell ill and will be replaced by Denise Engels. We have divided this 90-minute sessions in 2 parts. In the first 60 minutes, we'll hear from the speakers and also collect some responses to some of the questions we actually have for you. We'd like to give you the opportunity to leave after 60 minutes. I know we are all very busy, but if you have a little bit more time to spare, you're welcome to stay for the second part of the session, where we'll offer the opportunity to engage with our speakers and the host and ask a few questions. At the end of the 60-minute sessions already, we'll share a link with you to give us some feedback and also register your interests in some follow-up activities that we would like to organize for you to support the activities in this field. So please don't leave without completing the survey at the end. And also, because this is a question that is always being asked, we will share the slides with all registrants after the meeting. It's always very interesting to know who is in the room. Of course, we have a list of registrants, but if you take a moment to just share your name, your position, your organization, and your chart in the chat. And if you want, you can please also add a sentence on your interest in the session and in the topic more generally. That makes it easier to connect with you and also know a little bit who else is in the room. With that short introduction, it's my pleasure now to hand over to Denise Engels to introduce us into the work of GIZ on climate adaptation finance. Welcome, Denise.
Hi, hello, Anja. Thank you also for the opportunity to host this event in cooperation with EVPA and AVPA. It's a pleasure. I have the nice task to welcome you here today on behalf of GIZ as one of the co-hosts. And as some of you already know or might already know, and as Anja already said, we are a global service provider in the field of international cooperation for sustainable development. So we support mostly the German government, but also other partners in achieving objectives in international cooperation. In our portfolio, projects focusing on climate protection and climate change adaptation have become increasingly important, of course, in recent years, and are for many of our partners worldwide a major priority. I mean, as you can already see in the news already today, the consequences of climate change are having a direct impact on the life of people in many of our partner countries, in many developing countries worldwide, but also in developed countries. And climate change has led to more frequent weather events like heat waves, droughts, which last longer than it was usual, new unpredicted rainfall like we had it nearby Bonn last year, flooding, increasing temperatures, all those impacts. And those climate change impacts that can already be seen lead to a growing demand for new technologies and services that help people deal with those new circumstances and adapt themselves to climate change somehow. Examples for solutions to make it more concrete are more efficient irrigation or cooling systems, weather forecast technologies, drought-resistant seeds, resilient infrastructure in general. So all kinds of solutions, especially also in agricultural value chains, that make them more resilient. So, and we see that many companies, especially smaller ones, SMEs, already react to changing demands by their clients due to climate change and offer such solutions, but are maybe not even aware themselves that this is actually a climate adaptation benefit they are offering, and that there is a link to a changing climate. So this also results in new investment opportunities, especially for impact investors interested in expanding their portfolio in climate change beyond the usual renewable energy business models. I mean, this is quite established, and we all somehow link it to climate change in our heads, while adaptation, it's not new. There's a discussion, but many are not so aware of it, because it's also more diverse. And it has strong social and economic co-benefits often. So what we see is that there are only a few known examples of impact investors really focusing on climate change adaptation and resilience investments. 2 of them are here today with us, so looking very much forward to the presentations. And in any case, it's much less than in the renewable energy and energy efficiency sector so far, even though it's so much needed. So yeah, at our GIZ project that we implement on behalf of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development on adaptation, on private adaptation finance, we address this by supporting both adaptation SMEs that have a solution for adaptation needs and impact investors. So among other things, we support the investee companies of the Craft Fund, one of the first funds focusing on climate change adaptation solutions, and provide them with technical assistance regarding the expansion into new markets. And at the same time, we also work with impact investors and provide advisory very needs-based on seizing opportunities for business development with a focus on adaptation. So if you're interested in the topic and in the first discussion about the different ways to work with us, feel free to contact us after the session or maybe during the discussion. I mean, we have a bit of time planned for this in the end. Yeah, I would like to leave it at that and look forward to the exchange. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Denise. And without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome my African colleague, Frank. Frank, what's the relevance for climate finance for the EVPA community? Just a few words about EVPA as well.
Yeah, Anya, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who's made the time to join us today. Just by way of introduction, as Anya said, I lead EVPA's Africa Sister Network. So we do exactly what EVPA does, but on the continent of Africa. We have our headquarters in Nairobi and offices in Johannesburg and Lagos. And we're all doing very similar things to what EVPA is doing, which is mobilizing social investors to collaborate on accelerating the growth of capital towards impact on the continent. So we work across the same continuum of financiers deploying grants, debt, and equity into the impact space. This whole conversation of climate is very pertinent to Africa because in many ways, despite the fact that Africa is not a big contributor to the climate change and global warming, we're one of the most affected in many ways. We're struggling to meet our current food security needs. We don't have the structures and ecosystem capabilities to really weather the storm around climate change. So this is a very pertinent topic for us because, as you know, climate change is a global phenomenon. We can't deal with it on a region by region specific approach. So this is a very pertinent conversation for us in Africa as well, and something that we shall be carrying forward as EVPA, and we intend and hope to collaborate with members of EVPA to bring solutions that are applicable across the world, and more specifically across our two regions. So thank you so much, Anya.
Thank you to you, to both our partners, Denise and Frank, GIZ and EVPA. Over to the audience, just to see a little bit who's here and what your background is in climate adaptation finance. If you don't mind to just show you a video for a short moment, just to get your impression, an impression about how familiar you are in the area of climate adaptation finance. And I suggest we do this with a short finger exercise. This is why it's important maybe that you show your video. If you are very familiar with climate adaptation finance, please show 10 fingers if you're an expert. If you're just here for the first time wanting to know more about these topics, please just show one finger and anything in between goes. So how familiar are you personally with climate adaptation finance? One, okay, yes, so a huge range of different fingers showing up here. Wonderful, thank you very much. And now if I can ask you, how active is your organization in climate adaptation finance and support where you work? One means you're not active at all, your organization is not active at all, and 10 fingers means there's nothing else that you do than climate adaptation finance. So, okay, so we do have some organizations that are actually saying 10 fingers. Okay, thank you. Perfect. And some are more with showing one fingers. Perfect. So this is why we invited to impact finance leaders in this topic. So we have Urs with us from the Landscape Resilience Fund. And Urs, if I can just ask you, the Landscape Resilience Fund is a new investment vehicle specifically focusing on climate adaptation finance. It has been co-developed by South Pole and WWF, and also with public and private investments. You really set out to shape the future of climate adaptation finance. Why actually has the Landscape Resilience Fund been created in order to just focus on climate adaptation finance? Why is this topic important in your view?
Thank you, Anya. Yes, hello everyone. As managing director of the Landscape Resilience Fund, I've had the pleasure to really dive into the topic quite deep over the last 3 years since we started thinking about the fund. And that really came out of the urgent need and growing need also to really get finance where it really can unfold its transformative impact. And that is for us in the rural landscapes in the global south, like where we just heard, we have a majority of the impacts already today. And where we have smallholders that produce 80% of the food that feeds these 6 billion people in developing countries, and that are at risk of a lot of these changes. And we as a resilience fund, we really focus laser sharp on that topic, and we select the landscapes where we engage, particularly based on their climate risks. And for that, we have a top-down and a bottom-up approach, and I'll be happy to dive into that more deeply. It's very important for us to engage local stakeholders because yes, climate change is a global topic, but effective adaptation interventions are locally defined and need to be built around what is the local reality. And nobody that sits somewhere in an office can determine that. That has to be a collaborative approach. And that's really our focus. And we want to support climate adaptation that can really be scaled. We're entirely grant funded, but we provide loans, technical assistance, and landscape development altogether. And our goal is really to be catalytic in the capital that we provide as a philanthropic source, but to really engage the private sector investment in climate resilient development.
Thank you so much, Urs. And let me ask Peter, Root Capital is a leading emerging markets agri-lender financing small and growing agri-enterprises to build sustainable livelihoods. What's the relevance of climate adaptation for Root Capital lending and support activity in Africa? Why is this topic really relevant for your clients?
All right, thank you very much for this and thank you for the opportunity. So Root Capital is an all agriculture lender. So we give loans to agricultural enterprises. And climate change is real and its impact to our small scale producer organization is critical, right? So our interest is just to make sure that we are able to help them create resilience so that they are able to absorb some of these climate shocks. At the same time, we also intend to help them improve their productivity since we are dealing with agricultural product and the end result is the outcome of whatever venture they are in. So our role is to help them improve on the quality and the volume produced. And how well can we do this other than playing our part under climate adaptation? Then finally, it's all about diversification because it's also good for us to help our enterprises have different financial business streams, as income streams. So this one helps them to mitigate any shortfall that they may come across. And as you know, for Root Capital, we've got 4 impact pathways, which really help us. And climate action is the second, meaning it's very critical for us and it's core for us to be engaged in. Thank you.
It would be really interesting to dig a little bit deeper into this and really understand about how Root Capital builds the climate resilience of agriculture enterprises, and specifically also the role of innovative finance to unlock investments in climate adaptation. I think you already mentioned the pillars. Maybe we can look at this a little bit more in detail.
Absolutely. Yeah,
I think we also prepared a short presentation for that. Let's just look at this in more detail.
Great. So that's Root Capital. Yeah, as you can see, the picture on the left, that's coffee leaf rust. And it really affected huge plantation of coffee farmers. And we all know that it's also as a result of climate change. On the right, it's COVID, right? They had to change their way of doing business. They had to look for ways of surviving. So these are the kind of challenges that small scale business face. So if they don't have a partner who understands them, a partner who knows what kind of intervention and at what time they need, then they are not able to bear or to absorb these shocks. So for Root, being a social impact investor and working with small and growing enterprises, these are the kind of target groups that we lend into. 90% of our lending to these enterprises, they cannot just walk into a commercial banks and get their loans. No. Some of them are too big for microfinance banks, and some of them are also too risky for commercial banks. So what we do for them is to give them capacity plus credit lending. So by capacity, we train them on different mechanisms ranging from agronomic to business acumen. And then for lending, we give them loans ranging from $150,000 to $3 million just to help them meet their short-term working capital. And I'll also bring this now as part, that's also how we are involved in the climate. Next. So these are the pathways I was talking about. We have a 5-year strategy, which is very aggressive. We plan to double our portfolio. We plan to double our reach and our impact. And for us to do that, we came up with these 4 pathways. First is access to finance. And we are doing it proactively by training and also giving them loan. We train them on various aspects, including agronomical ways, helping them to collect data from their farm level, and also helping them to use that data to help them manage the various changes that are taking place within their communities. The second pathway is climate action, which is why I'm here today. We invest in climate mitigation and adaptation because for adaptation is very important for us because we are already lending to these enterprises. So adaptation comes in as an add-on, right? So it's embedded in our lending because we've seen that it's a very critical part of risk management. The third is about gender. We cannot run away from gender. So we also support women-led or gender-inclusive enterprises and help them strengthen their governance, help them come with different products that can also help them engage different genders within the communities they work with. Finally, next generation. We must think about tomorrow, about sustainability. So we also provide youth in terms of career placements from the university to the cooperative, and we do that by paying for their incentives as they work for their various small organizations. Then finally, next slide, is our commitment to climate action. So we have within our policy embedded climate action. We are able to identify various ways by which we are able to work with our clients on this. And why that? Because of their proximity to these farmers. Cooperatives are within those smaller communities. They are the same members of those communities. Platform, we've been lending for the past 20 years. So we understand exactly what they need and how they need it. Partnership is like now we have the GIZ, we have the EVPA and AVPA. So we have all these partners who we are able to work with them and help us reach so many of these. So we do this by growing our lending in businesses that are committed to climate actions in the rural community. We help them to cultivate enterprise and farmer capacity because at the end they must make business sense, and we have to help them in doing this because it's not easy. Also helping them to innovate financial products that unlock. So this one helps us because we have to show the world how to do it, learn and continuously learn. Then finally is to amplify, to shout to other peers that yes, this approach is working and please come on board. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's really interesting to see how you really have this hands-on support to the enterprises and your clients, and how important this hands-on support is also for the benefits of these agri enterprises that you're supporting. Urs, over to you. What role, you mentioned earlier that the Landscape Resilience Fund also see its role in mobilizing additional capital for climate adaptation. Can you tell us a little bit more about this, and maybe also what are climate adaptation practices that you feel deserve particular attention?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. If we move to the next slide, we can see just a few numbers to get all of this into perspective a little bit. We have about 632 billion in climate finance in 2020, and just about 5% is adaptation. And that's really less than 50% of the cost that adapting to climate change cost in the same year, which was approximately 70 billion. And these costs will increase dramatically to 300 billion in 2030 and all the way up to potentially 500 billion in 2050. And so this really shows we need a way to really mobilize private capital as the only really effectively scalable capital out there to get into climate adaptation. If we move to the next slide, you'll see what the Landscape Resilience Fund looks like from a conceptual level. And first of all, importantly, we're a Swiss foundation. And this really is instrumental because we're a very early stage and risk-prone vehicle. And with that, we can fill a critical niche to step in and mobilize more commercial investment. We've actually just done that in Ghana. You could Google KOA, K-O-A, and then just Ghana and Landscape Resilience Fund, and you see a few press releases of how we work together with another investor, a small finance vehicle called the IDH FarmFit Fund, to provide funding to such a business that really helps currently 2,000 farmers, but will work with 10,000 farmers in the next 5 years to effectively adapt to climate change through more regenerative agricultural cocoa practices, and also helping capture more value locally. So for us, really important to not have to repay our capital back to our investors because we're entirely grant funded, but we do structure loans with that money and then work together with other investors to also help them capture some of the financial upside and therefore de-risking their own deal. And purely commercial investors alone just can't fill that role. So we're right in that niche as a Landscape Resilience Fund. You can also see here in the graph that this innovative model that we apply has 3 activities that are typically not really found in one single organization. And these are the yellow boxes. So really the landscape approach to the very left, that really places the local elite solutions at the center. And for that, we have local landscape coordinators that engage different groups in the community and reconcile different interests and risks and really build relationships. And then the second one is capacity building to really help SMEs become investable, because many of these SMEs, they don't really know how to present themselves and they don't have some of the fundamental building blocks to attract capital. And we build our engagement here on strong frameworks promoting equity, inclusion, and specifically also opportunities for women and minoritized groups, just because this is a fundamental part of being a resilient society overall. And then the right part is the loans to SMEs, where we really aim to provide this self-sustaining, effective, and efficient financing tool to help these SMEs build up a track record and their credit worthiness, because that's the only thing that would get other investors attracted. If an SME is only always being grant funded, they won't be able to show that they're actually worthy of further growth capital. And with that, we believe we support this economic backbone of rural landscapes, which are SMEs. And we think that these SMEs can serve as a cornerstone for more effective climate resilience. So altogether, really, we think that, yes, using catalytic capital from philanthropic sources to increase private sector investment will help climate resilient development overall. And therefore is what we apply as our approach. We could move to the next slide, please, which is an exemplary graphic, really, of also how we look at climate hazards and then what negative impacts they might have for rural communities. And then again, what could be effective adaptation measures to address these impacts. So in the first line, for example, if you follow me from left to right, we've got heavy precipitation that may lead then to floods, which then may lead to the loss of seasonal jobs due to the loss of harvests. And what we could then think about is maybe as an effective nature-based adaptation measure is repair and restoration, which means protecting the natural vegetation, potentially reforesting the area alongside rivers, and working together with other stakeholders to then make that area and the agricultural production there more climate resilient, and then also reduce yield losses. With that, we can move to the last slide and maybe just really letting me part with the words that momentum is building. You know, the run up to the COP27 has started. We believe it will be the adaptation COP. We now have anchor funding of about 25 million, and we're also looking for additional philanthropic climate leaders to come on board. So if you're interested in this type of work, get in touch and visit our website at landscaperesiliencefund.org. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Urs, for this very short snapshot. And as with Peter, I think it's always a pity we don't have more time, but I hope that we can really continue the conversation in other forums and formats. It's really fascinating to see where you both engage both capital as well as non-financial support and have this very holistic perspective on what you actually want to achieve with your intervention, which is not only to grow individual companies, but really a narrative behind it, which is about creating, sustaining livelihoods, building better societies, landscapes, and so on, which I think is exactly the way we need to go about using capital and finance for transformational impact rather than just direct impact as such. So really fascinating to see. Thank you so much. When we talk about climate adaptation, we always talk about this perspective, or there is the concern that maybe it's not profitable enough. Maybe it is something that needs to be subsidized in the long term. We'd like to find out from our audience, to what extent do you believe that investments in climate adaptation enterprises can be profitable or even generate market rate returns? And for that, we prepared a short Slido poll, which is very easy to participate. You can just use your mobile phone and scan the QR code, or you can just go on slido.com and type in the number to give us your view on to what extent you believe that investment in climate adaptation enterprises can be profitable or even generate a market rate return. If you believe this can be not profitable at all, then please vote for 0 for 1. And if you think this can generate market rate returns, please vote for 10 and anything in between. Okay, I can see there is a tendency to go towards more revenue generating and profit orientation. Yes, some people are rather skeptical about its potential, not many actually. Interesting, very interesting. Thank you. Please continue to bring in these views, and while we wait for some more results, it would be quite interesting to see. Yes, maybe we can stop sharing, and it would be quite interesting to hear from maybe someone who was a bit skeptical about whether the climate adaptation investment can actually generate some returns. Is there someone who wants to share his opinion or her opinion? Someone here in the audience, just raise your hand or just unmute yourself and speak. If you're quick, then you will be the first one to speak. Okay, nobody on this perspective. Maybe I have maybe there's someone. Simon, yes, please. Simon, yeah. What did you vote for? Please introduce yourself quickly.
Yes, Simon Winter. I'm the Executive Director of the Syngenta Foundation for Sustainable Agriculture, based in Switzerland. And I put a 5. And the reason I put a 5 is because of the timing issue, particularly as we look at smallholder farming. There is a need for a transition pathway that typically requires 3, 4, 5 years of transitional finance before profitability can come in. And this is because you need to move to rotational crops that maybe don't have a immediately profitable market in the first instance. You need to improve the health of your soils, which requires types of investment in different kinds of soil health practices and amendments that take time to then generate a soil health response, etc. The list goes on. And so it's really about that. There's a need for that, let's say, patient capital period in the first instance in most adaptation investments to cover that initial transition period. before profitability can happen.
But it can happen at some point.
At some point in the future, but a lot of the current investment doesn't have that patient period. I mean, it's great to hear about Landscape Resilience Fund, for example, and others and Root Capital, of course, I'm extremely familiar with and a great fan of. But you know, most investors at the moment don't have a way to take that patient period into account in how they calculate their returns.
Yes, yes. So we do need more patient capital, especially for this early transition phase. Thank you very much for for sharing your perspective. Is there anybody who has a very strong opinion or voted for 10 market rate returns perspective? Is there anybody who wants to share? Gunther, yes, please.
Yes, I voted for 10 because I'm supporting a couple of startups in Africa. And one is a holding company invested in 30 African agro-businesses. And they have a growth rate of more than 60% per year. And that shows me that investing in agro-businesses can produce a lot of jobs, a lot of wealth. And it is done by a serial entrepreneur, Looney Lipes from the US. And I love his approach. And if you like, I can share it with you.
Thank you so much. Great. If you have a link, please share it in the chat.
It's called Africa Eats.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that perspective. I suggest we hear about some more examples of interesting business models in climate adaptation. So I'd like to hand over to my colleague Denise from GIZ to give us a little bit of a context on their work and also zoom into the kind of business models they have been supporting. Over to you, Denise.
Thank you. Can you hear me properly now? Is this working? No, it's not.
There is a bit of a sound problem, but maybe if you go closer to the microphone, it's okay.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, it's okay. It should be okay, right?
It's a bit of an echo, but it's okay.
So thank you very much. Yeah, and thank you, Urs and Peter, for the insights from your work and also from the audience a bit. I have an impression that many people already know practical examples, but still, let me take a bit of a step back. And in the coming few minutes, I will provide a bit of an overview and some concrete examples of companies we work with that offer adaptation solutions. And we will think a bit about potential next steps for interested investors who are not really working in this sphere so far and who now have an interest in the topic and want to get more involved. So the introduction, I think, Urs already told a bit about it. As it was already said, the climate's changing and we are not doing enough somehow. So even if we really reduce emissions drastically now, in the coming decade, climate change impacts will become more severe. Also due to the physics, how climate change works, this is somehow not something we cannot avoid anymore. And it's also happening faster than expected by science. So the estimated adaptation costs, when I talk now about developing countries, are 5 to 10 times greater than the current public adaptation finance flows. So this is this gap was already mentioned, and annual adaptation costs in developing economies will be in the range, to make it a bit more concrete, between 155 billion US dollars to 330 billion, I think, by 2030. So there's this significant finance gap or investment needs. And for a long time, adaptation was seen as a public sector task somehow. Mitigation from the very early involved the private sector, of course. Adaptation was always seen as something the public sector does, and infrastructure and public households. What we see now, as we observed this a bit this year, is that this is changing rapidly. And there's a market developing also that could be interesting, or is interesting for the private sectors, at least big parts of it. And in 2018, that's the figures we have, an estimated 170 billion US dollar have been spent already on climate solutions globally, and this is expected to have double-sized until 2020. Yeah. So we think there is kind of a market developing around the solutions, and there are growing investment opportunities coming with this. Due to faster and severe climate change impacts, of course, as already said, but also because there are now national adaptation policies coming into place in almost all countries. So as the climate change impacts become obvious, policymakers are taking more and more action. So there are, for example, by introducing mandates for disaster resilient buildings and infrastructure, by also supporting climate resilient agriculture practices with national initiatives, and also with mandating certain things like water savings. Yes, and there is international support through international climate finance and a growing awareness as well of identifying existing solutions. What we see is an increase in impact investment vehicles with adaptation focus. We already see in the audience there are several examples in the chat of people already getting engaged, especially in the field of agriculture. And we have recently done a number of interviews on that topic with impact investors. So there's a growing interest. We can observe in integrating climate change adaptation into portfolios and in developing investment vehicles that have a specific, sometimes even exclusive focus on adaptation. I mean, I already mentioned in the beginning the example of the Lightsmith Group with the investment fund Craft that focuses specifically on growth stage SMEs with adaptation solutions. It offers ticket sizes around 2 to 5 million euro, I think. And other examples are the Acumen Fund and Landscape Resilience Fund we have seen here, Food Capital. So yeah, next slide.
Denise, before you continue to the business models, I think it would be good if you can try quickly with using a headset. Then I think your audio will probably be better. Maybe let's just try it. Otherwise, it may also help if you go a little bit closer to the microphone. Just to.
Is this more better?
We can. Well, why don't you continue talking, and if you don't mind, I interrupt you.
Okay. Can you hear me better now?
But yes, but it seems like it's much better. How's it for everybody else in the audience? I think it's a little bit better. Okay, let's try with in that way. Thank you.
I don't see the audience.
Yes, exactly.
The thing with virtual events.
And also we have to, yes, just in terms of time, also I have to rush you a little bit, even though it's really interesting. But we have to, so just be conscious of time that we can still move to the next steps.
Okay, so let's talk about examples briefly. So defining adaptation companies a bit to make a bit more concrete what we mean when we talk about adaptation SMEs. So we see at one hand that is companies which offer technologies, products, and services that build resilience and reduce vulnerability and help their clients adapt to climate change. And at the other hand, companies that adapt to climate change in their own production processes and contribute thereby to the resilience of their clients and society. I mean, this is what Landscape Resilience Fund also described what they are doing. The adaptation solution companies, the first ones that profit from an increased demand for technologies, products, and services that build resilience. So, and they help their clients adapt themselves to climate change, and they present tangible investment opportunities sometimes in semi-commercial terms, depending a bit on the respective business case. I will show a few examples. And as discussed before, these models become increasingly viable and also important in many countries. Next slide. We provide here a bit of an overview of different sectors. I will keep this very short. On the left side, you see the different physical impacts of climate change, and then how they have an impact on different sectors. I will just pick cities. That's me. Cities can be affected by heat-related death, like we've seen this now in India and Pakistan at the time, and lower productivity coming out of those heat waves, and then also damaged infrastructure. Possible solutions that could be also, I mean, air conditioning is a very typical private sector solution, or hurricane-proof construction. I will also show one business case that is dealing with cities. So just to give you an impression how we would categorize this and put a bit in order of it, because I mean it's a cross-sectoral topic, adaptation. Yeah, next slide. To make it more concrete, I want to briefly introduce you to three very typical examples of companies we work with, because they, from our perspective, offer climate adaptation solutions to their clients, and we support them in communicating this as well, and in working on their impact in this field, and also showcasing this. And the first one is multi-agri, agricultural sector. The business model is that they enable farmers to collect and reserve ground running of roof water. So when it rains, they install innovative water harvesting ponds, and in combination with providing efficient irrigation systems and climate smart advisory services. And then they help farmers that they can cultivate their crops even in the event of prolonged droughts. Very relevant in their environment because they are in Kenya, and Kenya was or East Africa in general, was very much affected by longer drought periods in this year, but also in the recent years. So the market is smallholder farmers, public institutions such as schools. So I mean, all companies, they are profitable, but looking for an investment to grow. Next one. This is Arctic infrastructure, as I mentioned, one that is working on resilient cities, a Nigerian company working on in the sector of urban infrastructure. Their business model is around providing public and private institutions support in planning and financing innovative urban climate resilient infrastructure in the bigger cities of sub-Saharan Africa. And they integrate nature-based solutions into infrastructure and urban spaces to make them more resilient. They work a lot for international development partners, also government institutions, but also for private institutions and communities. In operation since 2014, and also doing a lot of ecosystem work around the topic. Then we have this third one. Next, please. This is Pearl Agro. Again, agricultural sector, very typical business case, producing and distributing climate smart maize and soybean seeds across Kenya, again with a focus on this drought issue. The seeds are more drought tolerant and high yielding, and bridging this gap for the demand for improved varieties of maize and soybeans. Also market smallholder farmers, they are in their context profitable at this point, and we work with them on communicating their climate adaptation impact, and also showcasing this to potential investors. And the idea is that they want to grow. This was the three examples I brought, just to provide to those who don't have a portfolio or don't really know how to what a company could look like, just to give you an examples. And yeah, next slide. Next steps, before I end, maybe a few thoughts on possible next steps for investors that are actually interested in the topic now. I think they already have portfolio companies with an adaptation impact. I mean, an increasing number of impact investors is building a pipeline specifically focusing on adaptation. For everyone else who's just interested in the topic, it might be a good, useful first step to take a look at the existing portfolio. On screening the existing portfolio for adaptation relevant companies, which requires a bit of an understanding of what climate change impacts in the respective country region exist and what sectors companies are working in, and understanding whether products and services contribute to mitigating climate change impacts, and also check a bit to avoid maladaptation. I mean, there are also some solutions which, like assessing groundwater to ease water scarcity, and that lowers the groundwater level. Not all adaptation solutions that look like a good adaptation solution at the first glance are one in the long run. I mean, such a portfolio screening might help to just build a basis for supporting those companies in increasing their impact, but also in communicating this part of the impact. And but also for the respective fund to communicate adaptation impacts to investors and funders, and to increase internal capacity on climate change adaptation. I mean, this is one example activity of what GIZ can support, and what we support sometimes for impact investors. Other activities depend a bit on needs-based and depend on the kind of interest. I think this is one example for a possible next step. Usually have interviews with the investors and see what their interest is and where they stand with the topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Denise. And actually, we'll just continue on that question. We would like to find out from you what you believe are the major concerns and barriers to your organization regarding climate adaptation investments, or not only your organizations, but the investors that you work in. I realize that some of you are intermediaries working with different investors. So we prepared another short poll for that question. What do you believe are major concerns or barriers in your organizations regarding climate adaptation investing? Is there a lack of awareness of importance of the impact of climate adaptation? Do you think there's a lack of awareness of how to strengthen climate adaptation in existing portfolios? Would you say there's a lack of investment-ready projects and companies? Do you think it's just not profitable enough for you or the investors that you're supporting? Or do you think there is, are you told, or do you consider that the risk of investing climate adaptation opportunities is just too high? Please, yes, if you can, again, join the Slido poll with the number 2851029. And then let us know where you think the highest barriers and risks and concerns are for the investing community. Lack of awareness of how to strengthen impact in existing portfolio, yes. But still a perception of low profitability. Yes. High risk still. But then also some lack of investment-ready projects and companies. That's certainly something that we hear quite often. Thank you very much for that perspective. Keep voting for it. We will. They're not in vain. Will we continue to look at them after the session? And I'd like to move to a second question, which is about the kind of support that you would need, or what you believe the investment community needs, the impact investment community that you are engaging with. What kind of support would they need in order to invest more in climate adaptation, or the ecosystem around it? So would it be more about training opportunities? Would it be advice on your own strategy? Would it be about opportunities for peer learning? Would you like to see more support to investment-ready projects and companies, the transparency on investment-ready projects, better regulatory frameworks? Or are you really also looking out for co-investors to share the risks and offer more opportunities for co-investments? What kind of support would you need? Investment-ready projects and companies, big issue. Access to suitable co-investors, that's also very interesting. Thank you so much. Keep the results coming in. Transparency on investment-ready projects. So that means we may have some investment-ready projects out there, but it's very difficult to see where they are and which ones they are. So you would like to have a bit more transparency on suitable investment opportunities, access to suitable co-investors, some training opportunities, some tailored advice on your own strategies. Does not seem to be somewhat a priority, but not so much to many people. If I can just hear from maybe 1-2 people, thank you very much for sharing. Could I just get some impressions, some feedback from from one or two people about what you voted for, what are your main concerns, or what do you see are the main concerns in the investment community, and what kind of support do you think is needed? Does someone want to? Someone has a view on that?
Hey,
Yes.
happy to talk there. So yeah, Tapman from British International Investment. I know from our perspective, where we sort of have, we fund quite large ticket sizes. And so in the adaptation resilience space, it's very difficult to identify investment ready opportunities. And I think sort of Simon sort of touched on this earlier, as well as Urza, like all these opportunities are quite small scale and startup. And so it's that lead time of getting them to a point at which an organization like us of our size and the sort of ticket size and checks that we write are they're ready to absorb that capital. But that's sort of a function of the type of financial organization we are.
Thank you very much, Tatwan, for sharing that perspective. Someone else who would like to share a perspective on what you voted as the highest concern to you and where some support would be required? Yes, I can see John raising his hand. John, please.
Yes,
There's a bit of an echo in the line.
I have my phone on too. Please let me come back to this after
Yes, if we still have time, or we discuss later in the session after 1 p.m. Unfortunately, exactly, we are running out of time. I really like to thank you for your participation, but before you leave, please fill in a survey to stay in touch, but also really to hear from you and receive some feedback on how we can continue this conversation, what you would need from us. And I would really like to thank the speakers. Urs, thank you so much. Peter, thank you so much. And Denise for this valuable input and conversation that you enabled us to have in the last 60 minutes. Also a big thank you to EVPA and GIZ for partnering with us on this topic, the European Commission for supporting investing for development, and of course, mostly to the audience for taking some time and engaging with us. So the next steps will be that we will look at the results, the feedback that we get from you. We will consult internally and see what offers we can provide as a community of hosts of this session with GIZ and EVPA, and also see what ideas you can provide us with. I'd really like to invite you to stay on for a continuous discussion with our hosts and our speakers. So if you like to stay on, in 1-2 minutes, we'll just continue the discussion. Just grab yourself maybe a glass of water if it's hot in your room, as it is here in Germany, and then come back to us in 1 or 2 minutes. Otherwise, for those who are leaving us now, thank you very much for joining us, and we hope to see you at some other opportunities with EVPA.
maybe in this lull, I can chime in and share what I was going to say. Contributing regarding investment readiness, I certainly believe that, as some others have said, that investment readiness is a serious problem. There are many, many great companies that are actually generating profit, that have investable business plans, but they lack a bit in terms of investment readiness. And that's why we created our company, Pangea Africa, with the aim of supporting the investment readiness of these companies so that they can improve their communications, improve some of their financial projections, perhaps other things like governance, so that they can be more attractive to to global impact investors. And so that's our mission. We currently work in 3 countries in West Africa, but hopefully there are other such providers and investors also supporting these providers, so that investors in the aid community, so that more companies can become investment ready and more deals can be closed in order to accelerate climate adaptation.
Thank you, John. That is really interesting. It's great that you're working on this very important topic. What would you say? What is the biggest need you would, or the biggest ask you would have as an intermediary between the investors and the potential investees? What is your biggest ask to the investment community, or also the funder impact finance community? Where is most support needed now for the kind of work that you're doing?
Well, one point is that there's been a significant amount of funding to incubation and acceleration, and that's important. But these kinds of services, the private sector business advisory services, has been a bit left out, I think. And increasingly, there's a recognition that these services are needed. It's essentially consulting services, but the ability to pay of these small businesses is very limited. And so we actually we contract directly with companies based on success and a success fee model. But there is a need, I think, for additional support, for subsidy or other kinds of incentives to companies like ours, so that we can generate some revenue even in the early stages before success is achieved.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my main point.
Yes, I'm sure some other intermediaries here in the audience, I'm sure they would agree to what you're just saying. Are there any additional comments with regard to these specific barriers, or are there some specific questions that you would like to ask now to Urs, Peter, and Denise about the presentations and the information they shared earlier? And I'd just like to encourage you, you can raise your hand, and I'm trying to find this here on the screen, but maybe the easiest is I can see someone has raised his or her hand. Maybe the person who just raised her hand, if you can just go ahead. Antonio, yes, please.
Yes, hi. Thanks for organizing the event and for having us very interesting insights. And with regards to some of the barriers that were mentioned throughout the presentation. Could
kindly introduce yourself before.
Oh yeah, sure, of course. Apologies. Yeah, I'm Antonio Potenza. I am leading Prodos Capital and Fund for Impact, a digital platform which has been developed together with EVPA actually, and Innovate UK, and which enables early stage ventures to come on the platform and be connected with grant money and with venture philanthropy investors. And Prodos Capital is our project in raising an investment fund, PEVC fund, for climate smart agriculture, climate smart energy in sub-Saharan Africa. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, I attended yesterday here in London the Climate Finance Summit, and one of the obstacles that has emerged is a seeming disinterest of some of the financial institutions, actors, in actually taking climate change serious. And I was shocked in a way, however, still sort of like disenfranchised, that still seems to be a large mainstream thinking of conventional capital. And I think this is a barrier. You know, you may have all heard and read about what happened with Deutsche Bank in Germany and with the head of investments at HSBC. Basically, he had to be removed, or he stepped down, and the same happened with the gentleman from Deutsche Bank, having this resistance in actually accepting that climate change is happening
Mm-hmm.
And I think it starts with that cultural change, with that growth mindset to say, well, yes, it is real. We have to unleash more initiatives, and not necessarily more money per se, but how can we, as the financial services industry, support the local businesses and the governments and the regulators in applying these investment facilities. And I think this is where the financial services sector can do more.
They could do more. And you're mentioning just now, it would be about disinterest. And then earlier you said it could also be a matter of active resistance almost, as if people were aware, but they resisted the. Can you say a little bit more? Or I
think it's very difficult.
Is it about lack of information? Is it disinterest, or is it actually something that where people feel that if a change in investment practices or investment targets would actually change their own role and their positions, so that they have to resist against the change, the necessary change?
Well, I think it's a combination of most of what you just said now. And obviously it's very subjective. Each financial institution may have their own specific motives. And it might well be that it is also, there's too little push from the client side that, exercise too little pressure on these asset managers in divesting their portfolio and reallocating their portfolio. I think another element, at least from the chairman of one of the leading financial institutions here in London, it was just very bluntly saying, we don't believe in climate change, so we are not going to prepare any sort of investment opportunities for our clients around that. We are not even classifying our investments into any sort of ESG, SDG, or climate criteria. We are staying away from these type of nomenclature. And so you wonder, if you're a client of that bank and your bank is not actually guiding you and consulting you in how you can reallocate your assets into something that is more responsive towards climate change mitigation, or even towards a net zero approach. I think this is a critical issue. And as long as we have these large banks not actually pulling the strings in the same direction, it's just making it more challenging to actually spread the message,
Yes, exactly. You need a certain push, but also maybe a pull by the market. I think both Peter and Urs wanted to react to this, and then Günther, you can go next. Yes, please, Peter.
All right, thank you. So thanks, Antonio. The disinterest comes because of competing interest. So if you are a small scale organization, you have other priorities. If you are a large scale, you are driven towards making profit more than any other thing. So depending on the kind of enterprise that you are working with, that can also be a push or a pull. Number two, the fund structure. So we've seen organizations like Aseli coming up with incentivized lending, where for every loan you originate, they give you some incentive. And why this? Our cost of doing due diligence and lending is approximately $30 per business. So imagine if you are to expand, how much will it cost you? So if you get a partner who is able to incentivize that by rewarding you for every loan you originate, then it also becomes more attractive so that this interest part is covered. Number 2 is on loss sharing, right? If you get a partner who tells you, Peter, fine, I want you to be involved in climate adaptation finance. For every loan that you originate and it goes bad, meaning it's written off, I'll be able to cover you through first loss of maybe 75-80%. So as a lending institution, then that one also encourages you to continue lending. So my point here is getting partners who understand what you do and also trying to use the divide and conquer. Like Root, we are working with agricultural enterprises, and you know how close climate change is to these enterprises. So if you can get a partner that is able to work with us on such kind of initiative, then we'll be able to expand our outreach. And that's why I was able to join this call and just share that, so that if someone is interested in working with us, partnering with us, yeah, we are able to do that. Yeah, so those are the barriers, beside now lack of technical know-how and also adaptation. Yeah, the way Simon had said, it's the return on investment is between 3 and 5 years, but our capital is structured towards 12 months. So if I'm to expand it to 3 or 5 years, then it means I have to get other financial lines of credit or long term. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Peter, also for pointing to this interesting development in relation to using funding catalytically in order to mobilize additional funding, and the use of incentives that allow you as a lender, as a financial institution, to go where you would otherwise not be going. I think this is a really interesting development. And of course, it's not only about the big institutional investors that we want to involve in this, but also sometimes these involvement of these investment of the broader capital markets requires also the use of catalytic capital provided by philanthropic organizations and grant makers that would allow then financial institutions to lend and invest in climate adaptation, at least initially in the early stages. Thank you very much for that perspective. Urs, you had some additional thoughts, please.
I'll be really quick and then hand over to Günther. Yeah, thank you so much for this contribution, Antonio. And I think this resonates with a lot of us. I think in some communities, including also in the conservation finance community, where it talks mostly about biodiversity finance, there's some kind of a sobering moment these days, or has been for the last 2 years or so, where there's a lot of initial excitement. But then at some point you notice, okay, well, we're still limited with the types of financial instruments we're applying and how we're doing this. And are we really receiving the kind of traction that we're looking for? That's our ambition and mission, which means the large institutional investors, right? Where the pension funds are allocating their funds, or some of the insurances, et cetera. And I think it might be too early days to be dismissing what's currently going on, given the regulatory environment with the EU taxonomy, with TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, and then also the TNFD, now the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, which could be quite interesting. However, that is all really more of not a negative screen, but it's not developing new solutions necessarily, maybe in the aftermath, but it's not really creating a new market. And I think what Peter and what we're talking about, what we're doing is more developing at a very small scale. And let's not fool ourselves, this is a very small scale in the grand scheme of things. We're developing new markets. So we're facing very different issues than the types of issues that Antonio raised, and that I'm sure Günther will also speak to. Maybe last words: collaboration, effective partnership building, and really bringing each actor into a deal to provide what they're best at, in order to then have a concerted approach of financial instruments and technical measures to make it work. Otherwise, I think it's going to be tricky.
Thank you very much, Urs, for adding this additional perspective to the conversation. Günther, was it also about Antonio's contribution, or was it about a different topic?
Well, it is in the same direction. The reality is that our financial systems are making money mostly in short terms, and climate change is not in that short term. They are making money through derivatives of derivatives of derivatives. And that means conscious investment is impossible because you don't know what your money is doing. And if you want to measure your impact, the positive one as well as the negative one, your impact on the Sustainable Development Goals, you cannot do this in the majority of products in our today's financial systems. So in long term, we have to change this very unfair system. And this cannot be done by those who created it. It can be done bottom up through new projects, through entrepreneurs and so on. And that's the reason why I'm focusing on startups and venture capital investors.
Thank you very much, Günther. And this is also something that we observe in the EVPA community, that we have a growing number of members that are engaging in transforming the financial system, which is such an ambitious task. And I admire the energy that goes beyond it. But luckily, and I find this with the transformative finance project at EVPA, I find that there's a growing community and a growing a number of tools and methods that we can use and networks that we can tap into that are of people who are already working on that topic. So I think the momentum really is now to move into that direction and not shy away from this very ambitious target. Yes, thank you very much for encouraging to look at this bigger picture. Antonio and then Sophie.
Oh, yeah, maybe Sophie first, and then I can add and give a little more thoughts around what I just said. But I would like to give Sophie the preference because she hasn't spoken yet.
Sophie, we don't hear you.
All right. Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Thanks, Anya, for the excellent session. I'm Anya's colleague based in France and running the corporate initiative. Yeah, all the resources EVPA developed for corporate members and a lot of financial institutions are part of our group community. And no, just want to, I had a question on regulation and Urs kind of answered. I want to be optimistic and think that what we see is that corporate and financial institutions really getting ready for this not only environmental taxonomy that went out last year in March, April 2021, and second with the corporate sustainability directive, reporting directive out soon in October 2022. So we want to be optimistic, but I just want to share and witness that really the private sector is getting ready for that. It's not glory, because at least for the sake of regulation, they're really questioning their corporate social investment strategy, including international banks. Second, there were just a little bit of contradiction. Happy to share with you. In France, we just had this new data from interest from retail banking, retail demand for societal products, expected with expectations from the retail to really have social and environmental products shaped by banks, offered by banks, 25 billion euro just for France, retail demand for France for such a product. So it's just give you, we would probably miss some benchmark and comparison, but it's not a few millions or 100 millions. So we see the needle moving, at least in France, and it's in some countries of continental Europe, sorry. And last but not least, absolutely optimized collaboration, and against just being the voice of the corporate sector. If I may, definitely we heard, corporates like IKEA, Philips, BNP Paribas on the banking side, Bank of America, and so on, really willing. They're aware and they're strategically very much willing to play this role of, additionality in the ecosystem to make sure that they complement their action in terms of financing. Yeah. So not much of a question, but just a few comments. Thanks.
Statements and observations are also allowed here. It's not not only questions. Antonio, please, what is your reaction?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, to what my esteemed colleagues just mentioned, and just going back in terms of having some bad players. Logically, I do agree we have a lot of good players, and I think Günther was his name. Yeah, Günther mentioned we also have a similar approach, that it's using a bottom-up approach, working with early stage ventures, with startups, because it's easier in a way to sort of like rewire their sustainability DNA at that stage, because the culture is still fresh, and you can sort of like inject that sustainability lens and take them on a journey. And so from the entrepreneurial approach, I would definitely agree with both Urs and Günther. And just as an additional comment to what I said in terms of the big push or the big pull that has to come from both sides, I think that in terms of conventional investment and investment firms and asset managers, and mind you, there's a few and the growing number of good actors in there, in our community and in that society, but we still have obviously big influencers, just to borrow a word from social media, which are still driving and influencing the markets. And the issue there is that their mindset still seems to be driven by the assumption that markets will solve any problem. Okay, so if the market can solve it, then it's not a problem. And because markets can't solve climate change really isn't a problem, right? Because the markets, they can't influence. And as long as they still ride that mindset and are not moving away, I think, as Urs and Günther rightly said, we won't really see those big players making that big push. And going from a bottom up, if I'm an investor, if I'm, have a financial advisor who manages my portfolio, and this guy doesn't tell me what the bank or the financial institution actually is offering in terms of repurposing and repositioning the portfolio, I only have two options. Well, obviously I don't know and I don't believe, or I de-invest and go somewhere else, go to another asset manager. And I think we're going to see that shift in wealth in a bigger way, especially as we talked about millennials and Gen Z generations emerging and taking those investment decisions for the family offices or for the investors itself, right? So I think there's going to be a big pressure on the conventional investment banking sort of like mindset. I conclude with this. I don't want to alienate the conversation.
Thank you so much, Antonio, for all these thoughts, and it points all to the direction that we really need a system change rather than just doing the same as usual. And I think some people here in the audience are already actively working on this. While we've been talking, there were some interesting conversations around standardizing taxonomy so that you actually know what you're talking about. Also the challenges of supporting social entrepreneurs. There's a comment here from Papa. Mayacine, I hope I pronounced this correctly, Mayacine Diop, sorry, I pronounced this, yeah, about how hard and tricky it is for supporting social entrepreneurs and the due diligence process, etc. So there are some amazing initiatives for climate adaptation startups, but most of them are not meeting all the investors' requirements. So does that mean actually the investor requirements are too hard? Or maybe do the investors need to rethink their requirements as well? Yeah, so a number of really interesting comments here. Annalena, do you want to share your thoughts on this? You just made a comment here as well about some high-level mapping on frameworks to identify adaptation, SMEs, and business models.
Yeah, thank you, Anya. I just started my video. Hope everybody can hear me. Yes, so I'm a colleague of Denise, and I think I can just briefly make a comment from our experience in identifying actual SMEs on the ground in Nigeria and Kenya, for which we did some high-level mapping of frameworks that are out there to identify adaptation and resilience relevant business models. I think the taxonomy from the ASAP project was mentioned, which we also looked at. And yeah, to sum up our lessons learned, we found that this is another challenge, which is also, I think, or brings in more the perspective of the actual SMEs, that a lot of SMEs, to put it bluntly, don't know that they're adaptation relevant or that their business models have resilience and adaptation impacts. So it's hard for them to conceptualize their impact and then sell this to investors to kind of get their, vamp up their marketing and their communication to investors. So this is something that we are working on and that we are helping the SMEs that we selected for our core group on. And we're also part of the working group that Benjamin Mazzuto from BFA Global mentioned earlier. So there are efforts and different work streams to come up with specific metrics and measurement for climate resilience that can be applied specifically to SMEs and to commercial business models on the ground, which I think would help bridge the kind of disconnect that a lot of people feel at the moment between investors and SMEs. So this could also help with pipeline building and mapping business models in different locations across different regions.
Yes, thank you very much, Annalena, for this important contribution. And I think also this is, if I understand correctly, also the focus of one of the focus areas of your project, which is really important. And we may want to think about in terms of follow-up activities along those lines as well, because it always emerges as an important topic in these conversations. Thank you very much, everybody. We unfortunately have to close now. And I'm really amazed by the number of people who are still here with us today. It shows the interest, and let me just assure you, it's not going to be the last time we meet. If there is enough interest and demand for this kind of convening around this kind of topics, then please let us know. This is why it's so important that you please fill in the feedback form to us so that we know about your interest and we can plan accordingly. It has been a great pleasure to host this session. Thank you very much again to my co-hosts, Frank and Denise, also to our speakers, Urs, Peter, and again, Denise, for jumping in at the last minute and making this contribution. You can contact us on these contacts, and we will also share the presentation with everybody so that you have our contacts and we can follow up. Thank you again and have a good afternoon.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.